Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with a few thoughts for you, not specifically a review. And this time I'm talking about the Netflix Punisher show. Now, as I've repeatedly mentioned in various reviews, and as you can see by my shirt, I really love the Punisher. He's one of my absolute favorite Marvel characters. I really loved him in the last season of Daredevil, and I was super pumped for this Netflix show. And all in all, I found it to be a pretty solid show that does have a few flaws. The biggest flaw is pacing. It really does seem like this show can't really just pick up and go with itself. It spends a lot of time meandering and such. And I kind of understand what they're going for here. This is a series that really wants to explore a lot of issues that are very relevant in what's going on in America these days. I mean, the gun control is a serious debate. Veterans and their difficulty reintegrating into society, as civilians once again. You know, government corruption, private military contractors. I mean, there's a lot of interesting and complex ideas and questions that are raised by this show. And the show does treat all of these with respect and seriousness and tries to be reasonably even handed on its presentation of these issues. And while that's all well and good, again, it does really get in the way of the show moving at a decent pace. There were just so many times when I'm like, well, will you just come on with it? Get on with it already. And that's always a killer. You've got to have a reasonable pace, no matter how good your storytelling is, no matter how interesting the ideas you're playing around with. If it just takes forever for anything really serious to happen, you're going to start hurting the story, which is kind of a shame because I mean there's just so much here that's genuinely good. I mean, I have no complaints about the actors. There are some really amazing performances from like especially Billy and Lewis get just insanely good performances. Um, there's definitely some funny stuff. There's some absolutely intense action, and being a Punisher story, this show is just unrelentingly brutal at times. But it does really do a good job of showing you why you don't screw with Frank Castle. Um, it does present Frank as a little bit more emotionally complex person. This is kind of him still in his early days. He's actually more or less stepped away from being the Punisher, and it was really towards the end that he sort of gets back up on that horse. Now, the character I'm used to in the comics is that's who he is. In the same sort of way, some portrayals of Batman present him as he's Batman all the time. Bruce Wayne is just the mask. Frank Castle, in a lot of ways, might be his real name, but the only real identity he has is the Punisher in the comics. And that's all well and good. And the better Punisher stories out there sort of will use, particularly stuff by Garth Ennis, will use the characters around him to explore things like character growth and things like that. Because Frank is very consistent as a character in his views, and that does limit him somewhat at times. But here they've got a much more complex Punisher who, while no Savage is not as just utterly single-minded as his comic book counterpart. And I don't really mind that. I did kind of wish there was a little bit more of, Frank finding some bad guys to kill. The whole military thing did get a little bit old. I was kind of hoping for a little more fun with him just taking out regular bad guys, criminals and stuff like, the mob and all that. But again, there's nothing wrong with what they're doing here. It's really just, it was different than what I was expecting. And that's not necessarily bad. I mean, again, the show does have some flaws, but by and large, I generally liked it. Another criticism I have is, as a lot of people point out, that Karen Page, while it's great that she's on the show, doesn't really bring a lot to the table. It sort of feels like they kind of shoehorned her in, and that she doesn't add very much to the story. And I do have to agree with that. Um, Madani is an interesting character. She's an original for the series, and I do like that they did show that even good people who are working within the system to try and do good things might have to do some very questionable things. Um, and it does show that the system has its flaws, but it also has its pros, and that you can't forget that while a system might be flawed, there are genuinely good people within it who want to make it better. So, a lot of times it's very tempted to get caught up in the enthusiasm of wanting to tear down the system and all of this sort of things that people get to start saying and talking about when they really get their blood up. But that's the thing is though that well, what happens when you take that away? What replaces it? And that's the sort of side of things that people don't always consider. People like order. I mean, so much of our lives is spent in trying to impose order on a difficult and chaotic universe. People like to know that there are things in place to take care of things because back in the olden times we were living in caves and having to worry about getting eaten by saber-toothed tigers. Well, that wasn't so great. Today, where we certainly have some limitations on what we can do, but we also have situations where if you need food, you just go down to the supermarket. But I think I'm kind of getting off topic here. So, where do I rank The Punisher? Well, I don't think it's quite the best of the Netflix shows. I would say that like the first season of Daredevil and Luke Cage were stronger. Um, I did end up enjoying it more than I did Jessica Jones. And that's just because Jessica Jones, it was just really, really unrelentingly dark, which I know it's kind of weird to say comparing that to what happens here in The Punisher, which is also very, very grim a lot of the time. Um, but I guess it's probably more just that I have a stronger attachment to the character of the Punisher than I do Jessica Jones, and I think that the ideas that they explored here in Punisher just simply resonated with me more, which is not any sort of criticism of Jessica Jones. It's just certain types of stories, certain types of ideas are going to resonate more with different groups of people. And for whatever reason, Punisher resonates more strongly with me. So, all in all, while it does meander more than it should, and there are definitely some elements that they could have streamlined to make the story move better, I do think The Punisher is worth your time if you're a Marvel fan, and particularly if you're a Punisher fan. This is one of the strongest iterations of the character I think we've gotten outside of the comics. It's maybe not that perfect, ideal Garth Ennis Punisher that maybe a lot of people were hoping for, but there's a lot of good stuff there. There's a lot of all the stuff that makes people like the Punisher there, and it's also enough that to kind of make it its own version, its own voice for the Punisher. So I'm going to call it, guys. As always, please comment, rate, and subscribe. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi, and also join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. Until next time, take care and have a good one.